Welcome to Dearly Departed Online. I'm Scott Michaels, and today I'm speaking with Jim Tipton, the founder of the prominent website Findagrave.com. With the internet boom during the mid to late 90s, Findagrave received quite a bit of attention, being that its, at the time, unusual focus was of interest to people. Through Jim's website, people that enjoyed the cemetery hobby in secret had found camaraderie. We all thought we were the only ones. When describing our pastime to family and colleagues, we were often met with groans or quiet disapproval. I should give heads up to listeners. This conversation is going to be pretty geeky for grave hunters and cemetery enthusiasts, but I think you might find it interesting. So with that, I welcome you, Jim Tipton.
Hello.
Thank you for taking the time, Jim, to speak to me today. I'm speaking to you in beautiful Salt Lake City, aren't I?
Beautiful and cold Salt Lake City, yeah.
And you're originally from Michigan?
I was born in Michigan, but I kind of consider myself from Denver. That's where I went to middle school and high school. So
I am assuming, like most of us that are interested in cemeteries, you started when you were very young, hitting the cemeteries?
Not super young. I remember we went on a trip, like a family trip from Michigan to see my grandma in Arizona, like one of those horrible, memorable family trips driving across the country. I think we stopped at like Geronimo's grave, and my dad like planted a cap gun in the stones of his grave or something like that. That was kind of my first early memory, but it really wasn't until college that I really got into the celebrity graves, at least. I did used to just like cemeteries in high school, like many of brooding high schoolers do or whatever, just as a different sort of place to hang out or whatever. So yeah, fairly early on, but I wasn't doing it in my, formative years.
Okay, I'm going to give it a second. I've got a helicopter flying overhead.
Okay.
They found this head in this hand in Griffith Park, not very far from where I live, and the helicopters have been circling a lot these last couple of days. So,
they found a head in a hand?
Yeah. Yeah,
human.
Some people were walking dogs, and the dogs were playing with, came out with this bag of head. And that was yesterday, and then today they found a hand a few hours ago. So they don't know. It's probably a mafia thing or a drug thing, but it's it's always the joke about how many bodies are buried in Griffith Park, and not a joke, but you know what I mean. It's a legend, right. Like outside Vegas or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so starting with the internet and when it really started taking off, what year did you actually begin your website?
Well, the very earliest incarnation of Findagrave, and it wasn't called that at the time, was 95, which is very early in the internet scheme of things. So that was early, and I've always been kind of a geeky, nerdy insomniac, and the web was just kind of starting to break. It really wasn't like mainstream cover of time yet. And I was like, I want to try learning HTML or whatever, and it was really just a learning thing to do. I had 3 or 4 sites going at the time that were all just little hobby sites just to, learn HTML, basically.
What was the original name for Findagrave?
It's only had the one domain name, Findagrave.com, but when I was just kind of on my ISP site, so it had this long, horrible address I had to give it. It was originally called Noteworthy Grave Sites. That was maybe just for a month or two, and then I realized that it wasn't terribly catchy, and some morning at 3 a.m. or something, I came up with Findagrave, and it's stuck, and there it is. Here we are 15 years later,
right,
or more, almost 17 years later. Crazy.
I remember getting sent several articles, clippings, etc., with, here's what's on the web this week, or here's the interesting website of the week. When did that started taking off for you?
Well, 95 was early enough that it was, I don't know how much everyone will remember depending on how old they are, but NCSA Mosaic was the standard browser of the time, and they had a thing where they would say, they would list new websites that came on to the internet. It's like this big buzzword at the time, and they would be like, New York Times is online or something like that. There were so few sites there are companies that would come online, and it's hard to even think back to those terms, but they announced this website, Notable Graves, or Findagrave. I don't know if it had the name by then or not. And so that was the very first thing. And for the very few people that were online, they were like, and they came and looked. So that was kind of the first main press. But yeah, back in like 96, it was in the Wall Street Journal and the Rocky Mountain News and Oakland Tribune. So It was quirky enough at the time, and like, quirky websites hadn't really caught on as a hot thing yet or something like that, that a lot of journalists found it interesting, I guess, and would cover it because it was odd, I guess.
And that it was, and that's why I think people were sending me the clippings, because they knew it was right up my alley. I first became acquainted with you, I think around 96 or 97. And prior to that, as we all did, we had the celebrity grave hobby. And I think I sent you a few dozen celebrity grave photographs. And then we met officially face to face when I was still living in London, and you and your wife were visiting London, I think.
Yeah, you were a very early contributor, and those I kind of remember all of those early names because it was just such a fun time when I realized, oh my gosh, like you said in the intro, there's all these people out there, and we're all coming together online. We're all coming out of the woodwork, and I'm just trying to scan the images as fast as I can. In those days, people were sending me stacks of photos that I would scan and send back, which just seems archaic now. But yeah, I think you were number like 306 if you go and look at your Findagrave number. You're something like that, and you could have been even earlier because at some point I had to rejigger those numbers, and they got laid out alphabetically, and wherever you fell, you got assigned that new number. So, but you were very early, and I certainly remember you sending in dozens, I think maybe even hundreds of photos. I think probably back as far as 96.
I remember when you had the page, the top 10 contributors, and it was always like a battle who was going to be the first. But then this was long before you opened up the Findagrave to what it has become. But we'll get into that a little bit further on. But as I figure, correct me if I'm wrong, but it says on your website you get 70 million listings. You have 70 million listings.
I think we have 74 million, something like that. We just crossed another threshold. That's 74 million, yeah. And we're adding records at far greater the rate than people are dying in the United States. We're adding like triple that rate. So we see that as like making positive ground on the names that are out there. So yeah, it's about every 22 days we'll add another million. So that number keeps shooting up.
When did you open it up from just the famous people to everybody?
Well, that was a huge pivotal point in our history, and I certainly didn't see it as that when it happened. The way that happened, everything at Findagrave has essentially just been this snowball ride for me, where it's just evolved. I didn't set out to be like, oh, I'm going to build a site that hopefully documents millions of graves. I never in a million years thought we would end up near that, and I wasn't even going for that. It happened. I put up my few, 100 listings of Elvis and Marilyn Monroe with little campy bios for them and things like that, and then people just started sending more, and then people started sending me Civil War generals, and I'd be like, well, I don't know if that's famous because I don't recognize it, but what the heck? What's the harm in putting it up? And then someone would say, I'm so glad you're adding Civil War brigadier generals. So it's really just been this evolution and me trying to keep up with the type of data that's coming in. And yeah, the going from famous only to non-famous happened in that same organic evolution where people started saying, oh, my grandma made the best cherry pie in Dawson City, Tennessee. She was famous. If you lived here, you knew who she was or whatever. And to me, I was like, well, that's obviously not famous. And I realized it'd be easier for me, frankly, to just be like, I don't have to say everyone's famous to list them. I don't have to make that call, although I still do actually. but to at least get you included on the site and your name registered and a memorial built, anyone could do it. So just one night I said, well, I'm going to build the tools to let anyone add anyone, and that absolutely opened the floodgates to take us from a few thousand names to where we are now at almost 75 million.
That's insane.
Yeah, it is insane. It's more insane to me probably than anyone else in the world, and I'm the one kind of somewhat at the helm of it, and it just seems shocking to me. But it's been a fun ride.
What kind of web traffic do you get daily now?
We've been getting right around 10 million page views a day. So that's an individual sitting in front of their computer loading a page, and that's quite a bit of traffic And I love running statistics on, like, if you printed those out and lined them up, it'd stretch to, China and back or things like that, because that's a fun way to visualize it.
And when it started getting that kind of traffic, I mean, how did you cope with the need for bandwidth, expanding more, virtual space, as it were?
Yeah, well, and again, there was no light bulb moment where suddenly we got the Time interview or something, and our traffic quintupled or whatever. It has been this absolutely slow march to 10 million page views a day, and I hope it continues to keep marching right on up to 20 million page views a day.
Right.
So it wasn't like boom, suddenly you have to deal with all of that. It allowed me to kind of do it slowly and naturally. But the story of Findagrave hosting is probably not terribly interesting to anyone but a few very nerdy people. But it's been an odd ride there too, because I've always been right on the edge of being able to afford the bandwidth. So I've always gone with the bargain basement guys, and I've had two companies go out of business from under me. And on the day that they went out of business, I had to go in there with no notice, pull back the servers, and find a new home. So that's happened twice. Currently, they're in a very stable spot, and they've been there for the last 5 or 6 years, and I'm feeling pretty good about them. But it's been a storied ride for the servers too.
No kidding. I mean, that has got to be, well, it's just crazy space. With the photographs on your site, I mean, I can't imagine what kind of bandwidth that takes up. But there was a rumor that an organization of faith that has particular interest in population and genealogy has offered or does host your site. Is that true?
No. No, there's no. It's privately hosted at a company called X Mission here in town. They're kind of like the local startup that kind of made it in the internet world here. Good guys, and I'm somewhat friends with the owner, who's currently, as coincidence would have it, trying to unseat Orrin Hatch as the long-standing senator from Utah. So, but no correlation, no formal relationship with me and any religion whatsoever, or not me, but with Findagrave and anything like that. Purely hosted by hardware I've purchased and configured.
Because there is an element of a genealogy, isn't there? I mean, with the church that's local to you, but there is a rumor that they have this huge underground bunker, and all the birth records and death records they could possibly collect or continue to collect are kept in this sort of safe place underground. Is that have you ever heard that?
Not only have I heard it, when I worked for the Huntsman Cancer Institute, we took advantage of it because they will rent out storage in said underground bunker, which is built in the side of a mountainside. Everyone knows where it is here, and we would send our backup tapes to that storage facility. So every week or something, a courier would come pick up our database backups. And again, this is not for Findagrave. This is for the Cancer Institute where I used to work. They would pick it up and take it down to that safe or into that bunker. And if anything, earthquake or natural disaster ever happened, it was supposed to be safe there.
Wow.
So yes, they do have that, but I've never been in it.
That's fascinating, though. I mean, it's probably common knowledge where you live, but it's always been sort of one of those legends that I've heard, and it's interesting to get to find out that is indeed authentic. I could probably have Googled it, but it's much. My guess is they have a website that even tells you the services that they offer, because they kind of monetize it by allowing this extra storage in there. At least they used to. That was 15 years ago. But wow. And at what point did you stop working, in the real world and start doing Findagrave at full time? I mean, how long did it, was the evolution that
right.
You're able to concentrate completely on it?
I don't know the actual year that I quit. I think it's probably like 7 years ago, somewhere in that neighborhood. And that too was kind of this slow thing. I was working just part-time because I had 2 jobs in 2 different departments where I was, and I quit the one, and then I kind of cut my hours down even further, and then there was like this natural break point where it made sense to just kind of leave that job, and I left that and thought, well, maybe I can make a run at this Findagrave thing for as a job, which I never ever pictured it as a job, and I never set out for it to make money or anything like that. And that's never been how I run it. When I make decisions about the site, I'm not like, oh, how are we going to squeeze every last dollar out of this thing, or how do I optimize my monetization or whatever. That's just so not the way I think or do things. It's probably to my detriment at this point, because everyone thinks like, oh, it's this business that he's running as a business, and it's kind of not how I had ever pictured it or run it.
But ultimately,
I think it would have been sunk a long time ago if it were like, if I had taken on like investment from outside people, however that world works. There's no way I would have made enough money to make anyone else happy. I would have been like, I would have gone the way of Pets.com or any of those other late 90s casualties.
That is interesting. I think that, first of all, I mean, like when I did when I started Find a Death, which actually I remember when we were in London, and I guess when I asked you if you didn't mind if I used the Find prefix, and you were kind enough to let me do that. But when I started Find a Death, it couldn't have been financially motivated because it wouldn't have been as fun to do, and it wouldn't have been, you wouldn't have been able to devote that kind of concentration to it. I mean, it starts as a really fun thing, and you pay your dues. I mean, I imagine that what you were paying to have your website hosted for so many years, when it wasn't, providing any sort of income, I was paying a fortune in hosting, and it was just crazy. Now with advertising, I can at least cover my expenses, but it's still, it cost a fortune, I would imagine, for you too.
Yeah, I was fortunate early on to have people who understood that I was running a site like that. So I kind of, like, with my very first host, which was out of Denver, which is where I was when I first started it. He kept giving me like $20 a month, like my standard ISP rate, for like 2 years beyond what he really should have, or something like that. And then he raised it. His company was bought out, and they raised the rate to 20 times that, or not 20 times that, but whatever, way more than I could afford. So I looked for another local company that would host here. But yeah, and then at that point, it was absolutely not making any money, because there were no ads, or there was just I was just doing it because I loved it.
Now this is your full-time gig, I understand that your wife and your daughter are involved too.
My wife is. My daughter, not so much. At one point, when I could still convince her to do it, she was stuffing envelopes for 20 cents an envelope or something to send out those free Findagrave bumper stickers. That's kind of the extent of her involvement, other than getting hauled to cemeteries on family vacations, which my wife has been terrific about too. But yeah, my wife helps with email. We get this crush of email. As you can imagine, we've got about 1 million registered contributors, and stuff comes up, and they've got to email us, and we've got to fix things. And she helps tremendously with that.
When you say stuff comes up and you've got to fix things, you're talking about the particular individual content?
Yeah. I mean, with 74 million records, 75 million records, and 1 million users, there's going to be errors, there's going to be corrections, the duplicate cemeteries get added, duplicate memorials get built, just the day-to-day, stuff you've got to fix. Mm-hmm. And we've tried to build a system where contributors can really fix most of that stuff themselves and have like feedback with the other contributors, because in general what I see Findagrave as is a publishing platform, really, where people can go out and publish their cemetery research, and hopefully they stay active, members of the site, and that it's a living set of data that people are constantly fixing, and it's constantly getting better. But people go away, or they die sometimes, or they leave the site for whatever reason, and they might have added information that we need to edit. So that usually comes in through email, like 1,000 emails a day at least are getting sent in. Yeah, so it's a tremendous amount.
How many people you have on your main Who We Are page? There's about 5 or 6 individuals that are put out, but are those the only people, aside from Tanya, that have access to the databases, to the people, to the ones that have to go in and do the corrections. And
yeah,
stuff.
and administrative access. Yeah, I don't know how many people are listed on that page right now. There's a few people who are who prefer to kind of remain behind the scenes, who are also working on it, because that's totally optional whether or not you want to have your face plastered out there on the internet for everyone to see. But those people that you see there are absolutely invaluable people. The administrators who have just kind of risen to the top over the years, and I've picked a few off that have been these absolutely stellar people who clearly kind of get the nature of the site, so fully that I've asked them if they wanted to become administrators, and they've been incredible. And I don't think I could run the site. I know I couldn't run the site without them. At this point, they have done tons of work, and I'm incredibly thankful for them. And some of them, guys like AJ Merrick and Russ Dodge, are just like you. Their names that go way, way back to '96, and they've been on since the very beginning.
No, I know what you mean. I have a message board, and I've got these wonderful moderators on it that deal with hundreds of issues every day, and they do it completely in their own time, and it's invaluable. It really is. You cannot. If I could pay them, I couldn't pay them what they deserve, because it's insane what they put up with.
Yeah, exactly. And the level of abuse that you get just from having such a public role is gut wrenching. But those guys and gals are amazing.
Something I've noticed going to the viewer. When people have had brushes with death or grieving for someone that's close to them, they find the comfort from websites like yours. And I'm curious what your insight is from that. I mean, it's something about it, visiting someone's grave in a cemetery that was close to you, or having a brush with, say, cancer. Why would going to a cemetery website, in your opinion, offer comfort to somebody?
Well, it's probably not where I personally would turn if like I lost a close family member. But so much stuff is playing out, and I don't mean my own site. I just mean I wouldn't rush to the internet. I would probably turn to my close family and friends or whatever. But we do have like support forums where people are, there's like grieving forums that people can talk through that stuff. But you're right too that there's a lot of people, they find it to be like this cathartic thing where, like, if they've gone through something insanely horrible, like losing a child or something like that, that they can sometimes get on and those people will sometimes become very active contributors who will want to, for example, record the entire cemetery where their loved one was buried or something, kind of as maybe in the same way that, like, you donate to National Cancer Society if your grandma dies of cancer or something like that, and maybe just that they know that their loved one's memorial is always right there and they can visit it anytime they want. I've heard from a lot of people who've moved away from where their relatives or friends were buried, and they love having this online surrogate where they can kind of go and experience similar emotions. I can't think that it's as powerful as standing at the granite grave of your loved one, but to know that there's a spot online where their loved one's memories live on or something, that's another thing I totally didn't anticipate that it would become like a very meaningful site for some people, but I've heard some stories that are downright touching.
It is wild, the psychological ramifications. Well, the psychological aspect of graves, period. But one thing I've noticed that the people like you, like me, like Steve Goldstein, like Lisa Burks, like Mark Masick and Jane Osborne, these people have all, we do death very well. We understand death, I think, and when it comes to something personal, be it with each other or I don't know, we have compassion, I think, more than I guess because we're more comfortable with the cemetery aspect of things and the casket thing and the funeral thing. Maybe that's what it is. I don't know.
I think it's absolutely true. We're more familiar with it. It's like a funeral director must be. When it's personal and it hits home, there's no doubt it's, of course, going to hit you hard.
I haven't figured it out if death is the scariest thing or the least scariest thing in my life. I have the vaguest idea. But I do know that everyone in my social circle or the people I like and I respect the most usually have more of a little more lighthearted when it comes to death, and you can laugh about stuff like this.
Yeah, I'm in favor of being lighthearted about pretty much anything that's horrible. And death would fit right in there with horrible, I think. So.
Yeah,
anyway,
I guess as we giggle. Hey, because Findagrave deals with a subject matter that, death is spooky to some people, and I'm just curious, aside personally, people's involvement with the people that are actually listed on the website, have you ever felt like a real, I don't know, like been a focal point for some real nastiness just by having Findagrave generally, not saying, you put my grandma's picture up and I want you to take it down. But I mean, just the idea of having gravestones, memorials online. Have you ever had any specific to that sort of feedback, negative feedback?
Yeah, yes. To answer your question, yes. We get people that think that it's crazy and strange and wrong that we put a photo of a headstone online. And yeah, we hear that once every couple of months or something. Like, people are just like, you people are sick. Why do you do that or whatever? But and whatever, it's understandable. I guess some people don't picture the web as a place to have pictures of headstones.
Yeah, it's important for them to let you know that they disapprove. That's what always sort of gets me about things like that, instead of just using the throwaway term I always use is that God put that little red X in the upper right-hand corner, or left if you have a Mac, for a reason.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's one thing if they found their loved one, they kind of have a little more of a point to make or whatever if we have a picture of their loved one or something. But yeah, if it's just in general, you guys are evil and weird and disgruntled or whatever, whatever, kind of rolled off our backs.
And it's interesting also that the opposite of that, while people, it's come to my attention that some people who have had brushes with death close to them, sometimes I've had very, very nice messages from people saying, my in one particular case, my daughter had passed away, and reading your website, really helped me get through it. You must get a lot of that, people that have like a real camaraderie because of their own brushes with death.
Yeah, and we have, there's definitely we hear a lot more of that than we do of the people who think it's crazy or whatever. And we love to hear that. Of course, who doesn't like positive feedback? And those are the ones instead of deleting, we post to our little success stories section or whatever. And yeah, we absolutely love that part of it. I think everyone feels good when they're helping other people, and so it's good to hear, when you're helping.
Yeah.
And in fact, our contributors, that's really what really feeds, I think, the energy of our contributors is you get that positive response, feedback. And it only takes, you may go photograph 3,000 graves and think, oh, why did I do that or whatever? I just posted those out there and, was that all a waste of time? And it only takes like one email from someone who made a personal connection on one of those photos or that information or whatever to be like, wow, it was worth it. And so, yeah, we love that stuff.
The network on your message board is incredible. I've read so many stories about people who will say, my so-and-so relative is in such and such a cemetery. I can't get there. I live in Alaska and they are buried in Maine. Can you help me with that? And I think that's such an amazing tool for people. Is that well, I mean, you had your own experience with that sort of thing, and your wife, didn't you?
Yeah, my wife for years didn't know where her own mother was buried. She died when my wife was in high school, fairly young, and she just kind of got swept away to another state, and she didn't know where she was buried and didn't attend the funeral. And here I am. I've already been running Findagrave for 10 years or something, and I'm like Mr. Findagrave, and we don't know where she is, and it's like a personal embarrassment for me between me and my wife. Mm-hmm. And so I put the word out, and you're right, because we do have this, I think, like this critical mass of people that can cover, the geography so well because there's so many of them. And I knew a guy who was active in the area where she might have been buried, and it was like 3 days later, he sends in a photograph. He found her, even though I had called all the cemeteries, fruitless, not finding her. He somehow found her and photographed it and sent it to us. So we had like our own personal experience of, the power of seeing that, the name etched in stone. And yeah, it's great to be able to do that, to help in that process for other people. In the end, it's our contributors who are doing it. We're just kind of building the mechanism that lets them request it and then be notified and, let it all happen.
Oh, there must be thousands of stories like that, and also I imagine aside from, there's obviously Find a Grave, and most of the entries on Find a Grave are actual tombstones or gravestones. But I would imagine there's been a lot of acknowledgement, people that would have been forgotten, some people not even marked, that are finally getting this sort of recognition. It's interesting how you can look at a piece of land, really, basically, and get some sort of peace from seeing, where your loved one is, I suppose.
Yeah, it's a little strange when you start to think of it as, in theory, it's just a headstone or a piece of stone out there with some dates or something, but there's definitely something about visiting a grave, where, for me at least, and I think for a lot of people, where you're like, wow, there's a real connection. And for me, it was with famous graves. I'm within 6 feet of Karl Marx. All of these iconic names, just being there and knowing you're that close to the actual physical remains or something. And of course, you're not when you visit online, but it's kind of a surrogate cemetery visit. That's how we see it.
And you added the function. I don't know how long ago that it was that you added it, but people can actually visit graves and leave flowers. And how did that? How did you see the need to that, or how did you, fill the need to that? What made you think that should be an option?
Well, that was very early on. I couldn't say when, but at least at least 10 years ago. It was one of the first kind of things you could do. I've always wanted people to be able to do something at the site, and I've always tried to mimic an actual grave site visit. And one of the things you do there, of course, is to bring flowers. And so it was a no-brainer to say, we call them virtual flowers. You can leave a little token, a little image, and a little note, and say, thinking of you today, or whatever. And very often there's tens of millions of those people love to come and kind of say, I was here, and you visit a page, and it's one thing to just look at it, but it's another thing. It's kind of nice to be able to someone was here today and visit it, and you can leave a little note.
Well, I noticed that sometimes sometimes I'll check on a burial on a listing on Find a Grave, and I'll see that for certain people that option of leaving flowers has been disabled, and so I imagine that's been a problem person, or
Yeah, some people, because of their decisions in life, don't get many nice flowers on their memorials. So there's obvious candidates like mass murderers and other criminals and Hitler and people who are generally not remembered well. We turn the flowers off because we really don't want the flowers to be a forum for spewing hatred, even if it was a kind of universally accepted evil person like I don't know, Jeffrey Dahmer or whatever. We just don't want it to be a spot where people say I hope you're rotting in hell or whatever, just because that's not what we're about.
Right. Yeah, but sometimes I think I recall that at one point that Joan Crawfords flowers were turned off and they're on again, or I think that's the case. So obviously there must be a bit of flexibility in there at some point for certain people.
There's flexibility. It's really at the whim of the administrators who can turn that feature on and off. And it will sometimes, if there's a recent death of a polarizing political figure, like say Richard Nixon, we'll turn them off because we get sick of policing those flowers and having all the negative ones come up. And then, in a year or so or 2 years, we'll think, well, let's turn them on and kind of keep an eye on it. And, so they come on and off. But basically we turn them off when 10% of them are negative or something like that. We'll turn it off because we
You started Find a Grave, basically for famous people's graves, and since then it's turned into a much bigger animal. But to the famous people, have you ever had a problem with people in people's families? I'm off the top of my head, I remember I sent you an email of a scan of Jackie Wilson's gravestone or crypt sarcophagus in Michigan, and I remember getting some really nasty emails from his family saying, take it down, you have no right. And granted, this was a long time ago, but have you ever had to deal with something like that? Say a mega famous person, and then their family going, well, no, hell no, take it down.
Not too much. I don't remember Jesse Wilson. I don't even know who that is. But we don't hear too much of that. We've heard positive things from a few. Wouldn't say mega famous people, but from some family members that have been like, I'm happy to see this. I'm happy, his fans have a place to come and kind of visit online rather than going to the actual grave. But yeah, I can't think of a time when a quote mega famous family contacted us and asked us to remove it. I think those people are probably so used to their loved ones, being in the public eye so much that it's probably not a big concern.
Yeah, I find sometimes that there's an expression, empty vessels make the most noise, which is one of my favorites. And where certain people will claim ownership to a person, on my own website, and they'll say, well, this is a relative of mine, and ... and you do a little bit of research and find out it's like the third cousin twice removed who once had dinner, that kind of thing.
Yeah. We certainly have. It's certainly the case where people will become obsessed with the layout and the bio and the photos of certain individuals, often famous people. And they rarely claim to be actual relatives, but we certainly see obsessive personalities come out. We have, like in particular, porn stars seem to, first of all, die young at an in-proportionate rate to other people, and or disproportionate, and they also have a huge number of obsessed fans, and so it's weird. Also, wrestlers, professional wrestlers, I would put it in that same category. People just become obsessed with, and they'll want to control every aspect of their page. And we say, listen, we've got it how we want it. It's a good encyclopedia style bio, and we're just not going to cater to your craziness or whatever.
You have a page on your site. I remember when you first started out, and you started with the posthumous reunions, Bonanza cast and that sort of thing. And I remember asking you about putting up the Manson cast. There goes my my little blurry lines. But the people involved with the Manson murders in a group, and you didn't want to go that way, and you've been pretty good about staying away from. I don't know what I focus on. I suppose is the more.
Yeah, and there's certainly a place for that, as the popularity of your site is testament to. But yeah, in the beginning, actually in the very beginning, our site was black, and this is in the first weeks of our site. Our site was black and kind of dark and kind of I wouldn't say catered to the macabre, but we kind of embraced it. And then it quickly, I made a change where I just really didn't want to be a site really about death at all. I wanted to be more about, cataloging lives instead of death, and really focusing on the death. And so we've gone to like pure white, for the most part, white pages. We don't allow any sort of posthumous photos. Even if there's people are also obsessed with murders, as you surely know, I might add that to the porn stars and wrestlers. Murder victims are people become obsessed with, and we don't even allow like grisly details about how someone died, because we've kind of made this intentional push to not be dark and macabre and morbid.
Because I remember that you had a picture of Tiny Tim once in his casket on your site. Because I think I contacted the photographer via your website. But you did have that at one point, didn't you?
Yes, not just Tiny Tim, but Tiny Tim in his casket. I don't know if he said that, but yeah, complete with his little ukulele and like a whole bunch of weird stuffed animals and everything. And yeah, the photographer, someone else actually submitted the photo. The photographer said, "Hey, that's my photo. Do you mind changing the line?" And he told us what a fantastic, crazy event his funeral was. But yeah, at some point we heard from enough parents and teachers that said, "Oh, I found a picture of someone in their casket, and for whatever reason, I didn't want my child to see that. It was disturbing or whatever." And the Tiny Tim one, I didn't find particularly disturbing, but I understand that a parent might not want their 6-year-old to see someone in a casket or something. So yeah, we made a rule of just absolutely no posthumous photos. So sadly, the Tiny Tim image came down, and
and they sent it to me.
What's that?
And then they sent it to me.
And then they sent it to you, right? So yeah, that's one of the rules we have, which I don't know.
Now, you used to have, at the very beginning, if I remember correctly, you had a page on your site that I haven't seen in many years of sort of the funnier graves. It's a little bit more humorous take on things that probably some people would be comfortable with.
Yeah, it's still out there, and if you can have the means to post a link on your site, the people who are listening are certainly welcome to view it. I can't come up with the URL off the top of my head, but I hope you have it. Mm-hmm. And it's a little bit irreverent, which I'm okay with, but we try not to be. We don't want to be looked at like we're just making fun of people's names, and frankly, that's kind of what we're doing with some of those. But
this has been inactive though for many years, so it's not like you purposely set out. I mean, as I understand it, I remember it from like 10, 12 years ago.
Yeah, it's inactive in the sense that we don't link to it, but it's still there and it works.
Okay.
And it comes from, you walk through a cemetery for long enough and you see some funny names. Like one of them is I can't remember, Lucy Loveless. Her name is Lucy Loveless, and then her epitaph says she was loved. And so, you see funny stuff when you're out in cemeteries and names that, are funny, or juxtaposition of stones, which I love. Like there's an Oswald Kennedy, two stones right next to each other.
I mean, how can you pass a stone that says hairy balls and not laugh?
Yeah, exactly. Right.
And I think even Harry probably had a couple of laughs at that.
Exactly.
Now,
or like, and also the funny headstones too, like the woman who had the parking meters head installed in the thing that says expired or whatever. We do an area of Findagrave that is public that's called Interesting Headstones and Interesting Epitaphs, where we highlight those, and those are links right off our main page.
I love that. I love when people put personal notes. It seems more and more often. I know that I purchased 2 niches for myself. One at Hollywood Cemetery, where it's a free-for-all. I mean, they give you a niche, and basically you do whatever you want with it. And another one back in Michigan, and it's only name, dates, and years. It can only be name and years. They wouldn't, and the date of death is really important to me, and birthday, but that's not an option. So everything's sort of becoming regimented, and because the funeral business is the way it is. But I do love those little glimpses into people's individuality.
I do too, and I mean, some places it's becoming more regimented, but I think overall it's opening up, and you're seeing more and more of these like headstones with like these cool laser etched photos and little icons. Like there's a headstone here in Utah of all places with a video slot machine etched onto it. Like this person really loved gambling to the point that they put it on their headstone. And I love that too. I mean, it's so much more interesting than just names and dates. Names and dates are great for, doing genealogy or whatever. But if you're walking through a cemetery, it's great to get a sense of personality.
Now, I've been doing a little bit of poking around on your website, and I've seen. I was looking at some of the top contributors, and some of the people that to contribute and this sounds, I don't want to go any place that sounds disrespectful, but when a human being can literally post 100,000 pictures, I mean that's a lot of work. I mean, these people spend a lot of time doing this stuff, don't they?
They do, and I certainly wouldn't say anything disrespectful about those people. Those are the people I respect the most. I mean, they put in the most amount of time. Yet to post, and if you look at that list of the top 50 photo contributors, since you mentioned photos, I think every one of them has at least 50,000 photos, and those are added one at a time by hand, uploaded using the same forms that everyone has. There's no like secret backdoor that lets people dump 100,000 photos on us. And yeah, I mean, it's a serious hobby, and some people spend many, many hours clearly every night doing it or something like that. And we'll occasionally have an outage or something, and our forums will be like, I can't get my 1,000 photos in tonight. Well, what am I going to do? Clean the house or something like that. And so yeah, it's a big hobby for a lot of people, and yeah, we absolutely love those people who are the most prolific because they're our biggest contributors. That's why we highlight them on those pages.
I think almost everyone that has this hobby can probably attest to having been on a search. I lived in Chicago for a while, and I've heard that George Reeves was buried down in wherever his hometown was, and I went to one of two cemeteries in his hometown for hours, going back and forth, up and down every road, looking for George Reeves or George Besselo or whatever he could possibly be under. And then it turns out that he's actually here. But we've all been on these goose chases, I think, or I'm looking for Dick York. Well, here's a big cemetery. I haven't the vaguest idea. I mean, and how many rows? How many rows have you done? It's crazy.
It is, and I think we certainly anyone in the hobby knows exactly that scenario you're talking about. Okay, I'm walking through row after row after row after row, and I'm getting greedy, trying to see 3 rows as I walk through the length of the cemetery or whatever, and sometimes for hours. Like again, you're pretty sure they're there, and you don't want to go home empty-handed. And I don't know if you characterize them as wasted hours. If you don't find a name, it kind of feels like that. But many times you do find a name, and you get the photograph, and you record the information, and the next person doesn't have to do that because we record the plot on Findagrave, and hopefully you see the picture, and you might get clues how to find it from the picture, and it gets a little bit easier for the next person that's making that same journey. But yeah, we can certainly all sympathize with that position. It's hot, and you're sick of walking up and down the rows, and in the end, you don't find a name, and it's insanely frustrating.
And it's there, and you got to go back.
Yeah, it's there, and you just think like, what, do I start over? And yeah, but yeah, I think any of us who have done this for any length of time know that exact feeling. But to be honest, I think the goose chase you mentioned, or the thrill of the hunt, is what's fun. I mean, that's what a lot of us like, is because when you do find it, like I know for me and my wife, we'll be like, I found it. Like she'll be in some other row, and she'll wave her arms up in the air and be like, I found it, and that's the thrill. It's like the ones that are the hardest to find are kind of the most rewarding because they're more work.
And I think probably the only minuscule downfall I have with Findagrave is that I get so excited about someone. I found Harriet McGibbon, Mrs. Drysdale. I'm going to post this, and it's like, oh, AJ posted it 10 years ago. You know what I mean? So it's sort of like, I guess it used to be sort of the obsession with some people. As soon as you find a celebrity grave, you send it to Findagrave. Back when your top contributors were the famous people contributors.
Yeah, well, that's true. Maybe we're shooting ourselves in the foot and removing that thrill of the hunt. But there's still plenty of names out there. We really do have pretty good coverage of anyone who's even marginally famous, I think. But there's a lot of cemeteries out there, and there's plenty more names to find. So if in the end we're so comprehensive that we've removed the thrill of the hunt for people to find, I'm going to see that as an enormous success, not a failure.
Oh yeah, but completely. I understand completely.
Yeah, but I know what you mean. I certainly remember the days where like, Isaac Asimov is here somewhere or whatever, and it's fun to go try to find them.
I'm sure you still get the emails too. I was at Marilyn's grave the other day, and I want to send you a picture. And you're like, oh, that is so nice, so right. Very nice.
Right. Yeah, we definitely, of course, have a feature where we turn off the ability to add photos of a grave. Someone like Marilyn, literally, the tour bus is full of people pull up to that cemetery. They all stream in and take photos of the grave and stream out, and we only want, I don't know, 10 photos or something at the most of a headstone. Is there a set of rules for what qualifies as a famous person on Findagrave? That has been something we've struggled with. I guess I might put it lightly. It hasn't been such an issue lately, but in the early days, I would say like people would, if they wanted to, even be included on the site, they had to be famous. So I was, of course, more likely to be like, okay, sure, what's the harm in including this person or whatever. But when we kind of started accepting non-famous, just regular old people, then we really had to draw this line in the sand. And anytime you draw a line in the sand, it's subjective, right? Fame is a very, you can't really quantify fame. Although we do quantify fame, you can go and vote for who's most famous. But we do have a set of, kind of criteria. Some people are, if you're a governor, you're automatically famous. If you're a Congressional Medal of Honor recipient, you're automatically famous. But it is a judgment call in the end, and we've got people we hope are making pretty good judgment calls, picking who gets on that list. But it's contentious. Just if we don't say they're famous, that just means Findagrave doesn't say someone's famous. It's not that big a deal. They still have the same memorial with all the same features and everything that everyone else has. We list them all the same and display them all the same. And it doesn't mean, fame should never, in death or in life, be equated with importance or any of that stuff. Right? People are angry that we list Jeffrey Dahmer as famous, but we might not list a war hero that no one knows about as famous, because they're kind of equating fame with valor or integrity, which is something we never intend. I would never link fame with integrity. You don't have to look far into the tabloids to know that's the wrong approach.
Not only is it death-provoking a reaction, but it's a murderer, and I understand. There's not an on and off switch, or it's not black and white. I should say it's just not black and white. Yeah,
it's not black and white. And we like the rating system. Like I said, you can rank someone's fame. Once we've designated them as famous, you can say, oh, this person's 1 star or 5 star or whatever. And of course, people tend to apply that integrity as fame. So Mother Teresa, well, she was legitimately very famous, but people will rank down, someone who was an evil person in life or whatever, just because they like ranking someone down who was evil. So yeah, we've struggled with fame versus importance over the years. But one of my favorite features is I love a necrology, like a listing of who died in a certain year. And so we have necrologies listed, and those are all listed by rank of fame. And those go way back to I think it can go back to 1900. And it's fun to go back to the year you were born or whatever and see who died that year and who was voted most famous by Findagrave visitors or whatever.
There are loads of really, really lovely stories of the people that Findagraves brought people together, and the people are being able to visit their loved ones. There have been a couple of crazy moments, haven't there, with Findagrave?
Yeah, there have been plenty of crazy moments. There was some woman who was part of the Manson clan was writing to us, and she was one of those people who initially just seemed like someone who was obsessed with, murder people or whatever, who are obsessed with murder in general, and particularly with Manson. And it turns out through a reporter who contacted me, she was one of the members. She was part of the And John Benet Ramsey, we had someone who was very particular about how her memorial was presented and which photos should be shown, and some people out there, talk about obsession. Many people are obsessed with that case. Started thinking that maybe it was the mother or the friend of the mother, and I don't really know the details of the case. But eventually the Boulder Division of FBI caught wind of it, and we had to submit a bunch of, paperwork and reports for what we had for them. And so, yeah, we've had some weird stuff over the years. I think it comes with the territory. I think anyone working with the public is going to expose themselves to some oddball stuff or something. And like I said, particularly with cemeteries and graves and people dying and all of that.
Have you ever had anything? Just curious. I had a big blow up with Selena's family, having to do with her listing on Find a Death, and I had specifically to her. Have you ever had any problem with her or her family?
We haven't had a problem. Certainly, I've never heard from her family, but that is someone who people are utterly obsessed with. I didn't even really know who she was until she surfaced, until she died and surfaced on Findagrave. And the number of visitors and people who would come and leave flowers every single day for months. And for a while, she had the most flowers on Findagrave. So yeah, we never heard from her family or anything like that. But I've certainly, she was put on my radar as someone who was obsessed over.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it was John Ritter who eventually surpassed her on most of the flowers. I don't know who it is now. I would imagine Michael Jackson is
Oh,
up there.
yeah, that would make sense.
But yeah, Selena, I think, draws a fair number of obsessed fans and maybe family members for you.
It's funny. Well, I put her up on Find a Death once, and honest to God, I didn't even put the page. The page wasn't even live. Like, it wasn't even announced yet. And within seriously about 3 hours, somebody had said something about seeing it, and it was crazy. And then literally it was crazy. And then I got the lawyers involved, and I could even remove her name from the website, and now. I had to remove every picture, and they gave me 30 days, or it was really pretty threatening, and so it was threatening. It wasn't really threatening. It was absolutely threatening.
It actually was.
Jim, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today. So I'll let you go now, but I'm just going to ask you the two final questions. For yourself, for your plans, are you going to be buried, or are you going to be cremated?
I would like to be cremated.
Oh, you're definite about that. You're not even going, You're definite.
Yeah, no, I've always been a cremation guy, which I know some people might find, he runs Findagrave. Why would he be cremated or whatever? But just like everyone, more and more people are being cremated nowadays, and it just makes sense for a number of reasons. But I am not opposed to a headstone in the cemetery. In fact, the Findagrave logo is a headstone with a question mark in the middle. And a number of years ago, for my wedding of all events, my friends had the actual, from the monument company, had the icon built as a real headstone.
Oh, how cool!
It sits in my living room now, and it's just this big question mark. But I have told my wife that should I die before her, which I suspect I probably will, she should just have the name Jim carved on the back, and maybe my date or something, and she could move it from cemetery to cemetery, and maybe it could, she could post where it was buried, or where it was or whatever, and it could be like a traveling headstone that just went to whatever city she was living in.
It's like the gnome.
Those are my plans. What's that?
It's like that gnome that travels around and people take pictures of it.
Yeah, exactly. It'd be the traveling headstone in all these different environments. Whether or not she actually does it is another thing. That thing weighs, I don't know, 150 pounds or something.
I was going to say those. That's what I always wondered. And I don't want to get into the whole thing again, but we talked briefly last time about marking people's graves, and we talked about Schlitzie, the pinhead, and what I wondered. We wondered sort of out loud about What would a cemetery do if there was an unmarked grave, if you just made one of those stones like yours and just stuck it there? I mean, what would they do?
Well, that's what I told her. I said, I don't think most cemeteries would, like, remove a headstone. You know, I mean, first of all, they probably wouldn't even notice it, right? Who would notice a headstone thrown in amongst tens of thousands of others? But I can't imagine that they would move it without really knowing what was going on. So yeah, that's been my theory that I'm operating on. And hopefully, it's a number of years before it's tested. But yeah, you know, I don't think a cemetery would move it.
No, it's fun. It'd save a lot of people a lot of money if they wanted to put a grave marker on somebody's grave instead of going through the expenses of a funeral home. But
that's true. Eventually, maybe they'd catch wind, and the almighty dollar would change the policy. But
the Findagrave Tombstone Company. That's an awesome idea. Findagrave funeral planners. You got to have the stuff in the cards, right?
No, the whole death care industry is not an industry I'm you know, ready to enter or even a big fan of. I like cemetery. I like people who like cemeteries, but you know, the whole funeral business is a rough one.
All right. Well, thank you for bringing the cemeteries into our offices and our homes. You've done a great thing, Jim. And this is if you have a legacy, this is a great one. This is a really terrific addition to the world, really.
Well, I hope so. I hope it helps as many people as possible. I'm not thinking about my legacy yet, but now you've got me thinking about it.
Well, you haven't even made 40 yet, so you're good.
No, got a few months until then. So.
Okay, well, thanks a lot, Jim. Thanks again, and my best to your family.
Yeah, thanks, Scott.
Take care. Bye-bye.